My Years in Waconia by Edith Nagel Eisinger. On November 1, 1935, I married Dr. Harold D. Nagel, a practicing physician and surgeon in the little town of Waconia, Minnesota. After a short honeymoon trip to Chicago and New York, I soon settled into a lovely home to become a housewife. I enjoyed being home and keeping house and doing things I had wanted to do for a long time: reading, doing fancy work, and occasionally I would go up to the office to help doctor with some patients. In 1935, Waconia was a town of about 1,200 very German-settled, very friendly, and happy to welcome me into their midst. When I would go into a grocery store or any other store, everybody was speaking German. I felt like I had moved to Germany, but the time went and I kept busy. Soon it was time for Christmas, which was a beautiful holiday for us that year. Both my relatives and doctor's relatives enjoyed a truly beautiful Christmas. The summer of 1936 came, and it was a terribly hot summer. I think the temperature was over 100 degrees for over 30 days straight. Night and day it never cooled off. With no air conditioning, it was almost unbearable. But we were busy, and often I would go up to the office and help doctor with patients, especially when he had tonsillectomies or minor surgeries. I would always like to help him. That summer, I think I helped him do 69 tonsillectomies. It seems like all the children had their tonsils removed in those years. They may have had colds or tonsillitis during the winter, and, of course, summer would come, and it was recommended that they have those tonsils removed. Everybody got along fine. We only had one room adjacent to the doctor's office that had a bed where we could have the children, or patients, rest a few hours before going home at night. We did not have facilities to keep anyone overnight, so they had to go home. It was in 1936 that we began thinking about starting a small hospital. We wanted to be able to keep the people at the hospital and to save Doctor much time on the highway. He sometimes would drive into Minneapolis to see his patients 2 or 3 times a day, usually 2 times a day. But if he had a critically ill patient, he would always go in at noon to see this patient. At that time, relatives did not like to drive into Minneapolis to visit their sick people. I felt I could be a big help in running a little hospital. I had nurses training and also extra training in anesthesia, x-ray, and laboratory. So I said I would be happy to help and do what I could. So the whole year of 36, I was busy sewing for the new hospital. From bolts of muslin and toweling, I made the towels for the operating room and also the things for the rooms: sheets, drapes, all types of linen equipment that we might need. We decided to start with 10 beds. We acquired the other part of the upstairs of the building that doctor's office was in, so we could have 4 rooms for patients. The 2 larger rooms had 3 beds in each, and these rooms were for women. The smaller rooms had 2 beds in each for men. We had a kitchen, a sterilizing room, and an operating room. An x-ray room was already there and still in use with the doctor's office. We equipped it with an autoclave for making our lap packs and other surgical packs and OB packs. We had a water sterilizer. I had to learn to run those things. It had been a few years since I had done that. Then we had a litter for taking patients from the room to the operating room. We had put in 4 bassinets for babies and beds for our patients, plus linens and blankets and so forth to keep the people comfortable. It was an adventure and proved to be very successful. It was hard work and required many hours of labor just to keep the place going. When I think of all the patients and the major surgery that was done up over the drugstore in the hospital with the 10 beds in it, I am just amazed when I think of the facilities we had then as compared to today, but it was very rewarding. We had many cases of major surgery. We had accident patients, and we had one burn case that I'll never forget. This burn case was a young man in his early 20s who had been trying to chase some rats out of a barn. He set himself on fire with some type of lantern that he was carrying, and not being mentally alert enough to roll himself in something to put the fire out, He ran to the house ablaze. He was brought into the hospital with third-degree burns on, I would say, at least half of his body. We just never expected him to survive. He required lots and lots of care, IV feedings and blood transfusions and dressings by the ton. At that time, we used a lot of Vaseline bandages, and the Vaseline was brought out by the gallons and used on this man. We had to change his dressings 2 and 3 times a day. As fate would have it, he survived, but not without lots and lots of nursing care. And Doctor did many, many skin grafts to cover areas of his body. Dr. Korchik, the assistant that would come out to help, was so amazed to see all those skin grafts would grow to cover these areas of his body, and the young man survived. Having lost so much weight during his recovery, when he was finally feeling better and up and around and walking around, he was hungry, and he ate and ate and ate. Poor Mrs. Brown, our cook at the hospital, just couldn't fill him up. His room was right across from the kitchen, and he would go over to Mrs. Brown and ask for some bread and butter or whatever he could have to eat, and of course, she always fed him. It was very rewarding to see him walk out of the hospital. I have to back up a little and tell you about the staffing of that hospital. We had a cook, Minnie Brown, a wonderful person and hard worker who really cooked some very good meals there. Then we had a cleaning lady, Emma Quasp. She kept that place so clean. It was wonderful to come up there and see how nice and clean everything was. Then we did the laundry every day or every evening. We would take the soiled laundry over to our own residence, and I had hired a lady to do the wash every day. She washed in our own place, and I had 2 big rooms in the basement where she could hang the laundry when it was cold. Then in the evening, I would fold up all the sheets and pillow slips and put them in a basket, and in the morning, Doctor would pick up the basket and bring it up to the little hospital over the drugstore. That was part of the staffing of the place. The first nurse we had that came the day we opened up was a little nurse from St. Barnabas Hospital. Miss Madsen was her name. She was the sweetest nurse and a real good person. Dr. Korchik was on the staff at St. Barnabas, and he had suggested to this little nurse that she should come out and see what a little country hospital was like. She was the main nurse, and I was there. And then we had a night nurse by the name of Miss Riley. She was a little on the hefty side, but she was a good night nurse. She took care of the patients. I was there morning, noon, and night. I'd get home once in a while. I had a housekeeper, so I usually got home for my meals. Not that I couldn't have eaten at the hospital, because the food was very good, but I thought it would be a break to go home to have my meals. Miss Matson stayed on for quite a while, but when she left, Cora Roddy from Waconia came to help us out, which was wonderful. She was an excellent nurse and knew the people around there and really fit in very well. She had been a patient of Doctor's at one time, so she felt that she wanted to do this for him. She stayed quite a while. Then we had a nurse come by the name of Marvel Anderson. She was excellent, a practical nurse, but she really did some excellent work. As time went on, Cora taught her how to scrub for surgery, and she became an excellent scrub nurse. Doctor really thought a lot of her, too, as far as being his assistant in doing surgery. She learned fast, and she liked it. Doctor had an assistant help him all the time for surgery. His name was Dr. John Korchik. He has now passed away, but he really enjoyed coming out to that little town, and he was so amazed at the amount of work that could be done under those conditions. They weren't the easiest conditions to work under, but somehow or other, we managed. We usually kept all 4 bassinets filled with babies. Those poor little babies thrived on the care that we gave them because we never knew which room we were going to find them in. Sometimes in the x-ray room, sometimes in the sterilizing room, and sometimes just in the doctor's office when we had surgery, or sometimes in the operating room when there wasn't any surgery going on. We kept the patients maybe 9 to 10 days at a time. It is just amazing to think we could keep them that long, as now the OB patients are up the same day and home the next day, which would have been much better for us and probably for the patient. But the trend in those days was that they stay 9 to 10 days. I think now of how much better they would have been just to get up, but that is the way it was then, and so we had to have it that way. I'll never forget one morning. Doctor usually went into Minneapolis following his rounds in the hospital to pick up his supplies or some extra instruments, or something X-ray film, or solutions, or whatever else he would need. In fact, it was a relaxation for him to drive into Minneapolis and just ponder on the way in and puff on his El Producto cigar. One morning he left and I was busy. I had the babies in the operating room where I would be bathing them. We had to bathe them in this bassinet because there was no table or any facility for taking care of the babies except right there in their own little bassinet. I was very busy. I think all the bassinets were filled, 4 babies. I heard someone coming up the stairway, and I knew there was trouble. So I left the baby in the crib well covered up with a blanket. I went to the top of the stairway. Here was a man saying his wife was going to have a baby and he couldn't get her up the stairs. I said I'd come down to help, and that I thought we could take a chair. Sometimes we would have to carry patients on a chair up or down those stairs of that drugstore. But I went down, and she was in between labor pains. I thought, let's try it. So we helped her up the stairs and barely got her upstairs. We didn't even get her clothes off when she had twin girls. No more bassinets. They were all filled. So I asked Mrs. Quast, our cleaning lady, if she would go over to S&S Hardware and get a couple of clothes baskets. She did, and we put a pillow in the clothes basket, and we made a bassinet for each one of the twins. Cute little babies. Well, everything went fine and the mother was fine. We got her undressed and into bed and the babies taken care of. When Doctor walked up, we had babies all over the place. Everybody survived, and so did I. I think the father survived too. I haven't seen him since they left the hospital, but that's quite a few years now. Those were things that kept us on our toes all the time. We had to be ready for any type of an emergency. We were in the hospital over the drugstore for 2.5 years, and all that time we had in our minds that we needed more space. We needed better equipment, and we needed more of everything. We needed better facilities in order to serve the people in that community. So all the time, Doctor was buying more equipment and planning for a hospital. We needed a place to build the hospital, so we bought the house next door to us. In the summer of '39, we had that house torn down and space made available for erecting a new hospital. By spring of 1940, when the frost was out of the ground, we had the place excavated. Doctor had made the plans himself of what he wanted. Of course, I helped him and got some of the things I wanted, but there really wasn't much, and I had to settle for really much less than we should have had. The main thing I got was closet space in each room. So that was the decision to get the hospital started. In the meantime, we were busy in that place over the drugstore. We sometimes had to turn people down, or he sometimes had to take some patients into Idle Hospital or into St. Barnabas or the Swedish Hospital because we did not have any space available over the drugstore. It amazes me today to think how much we could do in that space over the drugstore and the major surgery that was done. It's unbelievable to think we could manage to do that.